Hey all, Ron Armstrong here, filmmaker extraordinaire, and today I want to talk to you about John Wick Chapter 2. Chapter 2. But I've been really meaning to make this video for a long time, and I know I'm a bit late because I actually caught John Wick Chapter 2 on Amazon Prime. And I want to talk a little bit about that. But before I go into that, just want to say a couple of things. First off, me and a buddy were in New York going to get something to eat, and I ran into this young lady who is in film production. Her and I talked for a while, and we had like a lot of the same interest. And she's into like Scientology. She was into the church and studied a lot about the engrams and the whole philosophy of L. Ron Hubbard and how he was associated with Aleister Crowley, the Beast 666. And she knew a lot about that, and I've studied that for a couple of years intensively. So she got out the church and had this whole story. So I really want to get her on my show to talk about it. I think it'd be very interesting. A lot of people can learn about that because it's that whole arena of what happens in the church, and there are many documentary films made about that. I think it's just very, very insightful and interesting for people. And she also wrestled with questions of her sexuality too. So and she's working on the film right now. So hopefully we'll get her on the show. What else? Other things I'm doing is I'm finishing up Disney promotion. Been working for Disney for a while. It's been going really well. Disney's good to work for. And I'll keep you guys updated on that. But last time I worked on one of the promotions, it was very difficult and challenging, very stressful. But this one's gone really smoothly. So let's get in to John Wick Chapter 2. Don't know why I had a hard time saying Chapter 2. I think my throat is really dry. Anyway, the reason why I wanted to make this video, this is not going to be a review of the film. It's going to be a breakdown of the story, the characters a bit. And again, the reason why I wanted to make this was because I want to help filmmakers understand how to write better scripts and how to write better stories. I think there's a tendency to focus on other aspects like maybe cinematography, maybe acting, which is great. But what I see a lot in independent films is weak stories and relying on basically the traditional storytelling devices. And what I mean by that is, your linear beginning, middle, and end, or your 3-act or 4-act structure, and not going too far off course from there. When there is so much more you can do to communicate your message on a subliminal or subtextual level, that I think it's worth exploring. And one of the things I always tell filmmakers to check out that will help you in developing your stories is check out Citizen Kane. I think it's a wonderful film, and there's a lot of symbolism there with Rosebud and everything. The story of Charles Foster Kane. And then check out, what's the other one called? Chinatown with Jack Nicholson, because most of the story is told in visuals. I think it's a brilliant, brilliant film. And those two will give you an idea. But the point I'm trying to make is that a lot of stories that you see in independent films are basically explained to you. It's very easy. It's given to you. And there's no reading into things. And I think a good film has meaning on very different levels. And when that happens, the film becomes very rich and very meaningful. And many people walk away taking away something different, and it means something different to all these different people. And when you have a conversation about the film after it's over, there's this richness and exchange of information that you can have with your friends as you're having this discourse, And but however, when a film, there's no subtext to a film. When a story is basically fed to you and the characters are so one-dimensional, then I think it doesn't make for good storytelling. And we see a lot of that going on now. And even with Hollywood films, very rarely will you get a film that's has a lot of metaphors or analogies or that you can make to them. So the original John Wick, when the original John Wick came out, I didn't go to the theaters and see it. I actually caught it on, I think it was Amazon. I caught it on Amazon, and I absolutely hated it. I didn't like the film. I was like, what the hell is this? And for those of you who don't know, I'm going to give away a lot of spoilers, so here we go. So the whole premise of this, the catalyst of John Wick Chapter 1 is that he has a relationship with this girl. For whatever reason, it doesn't, you know, things don't work out. I'm not gonna give out the whole details about it. But anyway, this mob kid steals his car and ends up killing his dog. And because the mob kid killed his dog, John Wick, this ex-underworld assassin, goes after the mob kid. And that's the real whole thing that's thrust the story, is the death of his dog. And he goes through like all these guys. He kills all these guys to get this one mob kid. And I felt like it was just gratuitous in terms of the violence and the action. And to me, I didn't buy the whole thing that he was going after this kid because the kid killed his dog. But the killing of the dog was this whole, like, I guess it's this, we could say like this metaphor for the life he didn't have, or part of a remnants of a life that he could have had, or what he could remember. What more likely to say, the dog contained the memory, or was his last thing that he had that reminded him of his girl, because his girl gave him the dog. So that was all he ever had to remind him of their relationship and her. So when the mob boss killed the dog, that set the whole thing in motion. So anyway, so I saw that film and didn't really like it. Didn't really like, I didn't understand what the big hoo-ha was over the film. But anyway, so when chapter 2 came out in theaters, I didn't see it, wasn't planning to see it. So when I caught it online and watched it, I was absolutely blown away. I loved chapter 2. I'll say that. And the reason why I loved it, I had to go back and watch it a couple of times to kind of understand, like, well, what was the difference between the first one, the second one, and why did I like the second one so much? And then I realized that the second one contained this richness, that there were so many meaningful things that happened in the film that you take away, that, you know, it kind of like, it spoke to me. And I want to break this down for you. And these are things that I want you to take away as storytelling devices that you can incorporate into your script. And I've actually used these a lot because I really like using metaphors, symbolisms, and things of that nature in my movies. And, you know, great filmmakers like Stanley Kubrick, you know, they use a lot of symbolisms. So, you know, 2001: A Space Odyssey, A Clockwork Orange, you name it. Orson Welles. So, you know, and even if you watch film noir back in the days, you will see a lot of that. Excuse me, my throat is dry here. So, study film noir, you'll see a lot of that, even Hitchcock films, all right? So this film, chapter 2, actually deals with a different kind of storyline, where there's this mob guy named Santino who John Wick owes a favor to, and Santino comes to pay him a visit and say, listen, remember that favor you owe me? I'm cashing that in now. And it's what's called a marker, and it looks like a large coin. And now, you know, as I said before, John Wick is this underworld assassin. His whole thing through chapter 1 and chapter 2 is to get out of this whole assassin world thing. So, but when Santino comes to visit him and wants to cash in that favor through the marker, one of the rules is every marker must be, I guess, paid off or adhered to. So John Wick can't refuse, you know. So obviously Santino wants him to assassinate somebody, and it turns out to be his sister, because his sister has a seat at this high table of the underworld, right? John Wick doesn't want to do it, so he ends up having to do it, and there's a lot of killing that goes on. And the thing I loved about that is that we can all identify with that. So you guys, if you want to take notes, you should take notes on this. The best characters are characters who are kind of like good guys, but in bad situations. And I felt John Wick was put in a bad situation, and he just didn't know what to do, and he had to go through and kill this Santino's sister. He had no choice. He had to do it. He had to, you know, that's the rule. The marker, if you know, markers cashed in, you've got to do it, you know. So he had this great character put in a situation, as a bad situation that he didn't want to be in. Now, one of the great things about John Wick Chapter 2, as the 2 clearly says, there is this duality throughout the entire film that I picked up on, which was so, it was just awesome. And if you read, if you're into film theory, you'll pick up so much of this. Like John Wick had his opposite. He had Common, who I guess he's a former rapper or something turned actor. And Common was just as skilled as him. And they would fight off in the subways and all kinds of crazy places. And most times they matched, And I love that there's a duality there. And there's also this duality of, you get to see this very high class, rich world, and then also this poor and impoverished underworld, these agents that live in the subways, or in under New York, because the whole thing takes place in New York, and they're very poor, they're hobos and things of that nature. And so there's that duality there too. So I really love that aspect. And there's I'm going to jump around a bit, and also using that same technique, there's also the scene at the very end where he goes to the museum when he's chasing Santino through the museum. He gets to this like hall of mirrors, and it's an exhibition. And, he's trying to find Santino. He sees John Wick is holding his gun. He sees his reflection in all these mirrors. And that there's a duality there of seeing him looking at his own image and reflecting. And that's the one thing that set to my mind. And then comes the museum announcer, says, "You're here to reflect upon things." And when she said that, I was like, oh, this is just perfect, because it just shows you how these characters are, especially John, because he's reflecting upon his life and thinking, I got to get out of doing this. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to get into this whole assassin world anymore. And the villain, Santino, also, it said when he looks into the mirror, you hear the museum voice come on and say, yes, it's time to reflect upon things. And he's reflecting if he did the right thing in hiring John and also betraying John. And so there's that whole duality thing, that the two thing that goes on. And a good movie always has to have a good villain, and Santino is a good villain. But there's this actress, Ruby Rose, that she was an awesome villain. She plays also like this bodyguard assassin, but she's deaf, so she uses hand signs to talk. And her scene with John Wick, Keanu Reeves, is awesome. Every time they're on screen, one of the things I thought it would be great to see them have like sleep together, have like an affair. I thought that'd be really interesting to see that they have this affair, but yet have to kill each other afterwards. So I thought that would, but they didn't do that. But I thought that would be an interesting thing. Another thing is this whole, and now I'm going to jump ahead now. So aside from using this whole, this idea of duality, they also took New York and made New York into a character. And it's so interesting because if you live in New York and you watch this film, you'll realize that that is in no way what New York looks like. The whole subway system they redid made it very clean and white. And there were buildings and parts in New York that you knew that New York just doesn't look like that. You know what I mean? But what it did was they gave it a richness and character, and the production designer was just awesome. And what they did to bring New York to life, to bring it into the character of its own. And I think a lot of filmmakers don't realize the value in production design of how your sets and the setting can take on a life of its own. When I did my short film, War is a Bitch, I wanted to make this future world have a character in and of itself, that you're going into this new arena, this new world that you've never seen before. And with John Wick Chapter 2, New York, it was really interesting to watch that film to see how they did it. And the whole film is very European, because I kept thinking of, it's the style that you would see of a lot of European films, And Santino was very European dressed. And speaking of that, there's a scene where Keanu Reeves is suiting up, and he has a tailor makes a special suit that's bulletproof and everything, and it's so cool. It's great. The action sequences are amazing in this film. A lot of violence, a lot of body count. So just heads up on that. So the setting of New York is just awesome. Another thing that's really good, there's this scene with Lawrence, well, I don't want to say really good, Lawrence Fishburne is in the film. It reminded me of Neo and the Matrix thing when I saw Lawrence Fishburne. I actually didn't like his character too much, but it was very interesting because he was an agent who ruled over the underworld of hobos and things of that nature. So John Wick had to go see him to get to Santino, which was very interesting. So what else? It also reminded me too of I don't know if you guys remember from, I think it was the 90s, late 90s, Highlander, or is it? because Highlander had this whole premise where you couldn't fight on sacred ground. So if you got to a church, you couldn't fight inside the church. And John Wick Chapter 2 and also Chapter 1 reminded me of that, because they had this hotel called the Continental, and it was sanctuary, a safe haven for all agents. So if you went there, you can ask for asylum, and no one could mess with you there. You know, and at the end of the film, you have John Wick is in a terrible predicament where Santino, the villain, goes to the sanctuary, the Continental, and John Wick meets him there and intends to kill him, but he knows he can't do it because he's in the sanctuary, the Continental. So, you know, and so what is he to do? You know, he wants to kill this guy, wants to take revenge, but he can't do it on the sacred ground. So, and the whole story of the Continental is very interesting. It's really cool. Another important point that I loved about this film was the idea of these agents. Now, the film deals with many different, like, I don't want to say crime families or different like agencies competing against each other, but that's what they are. It's like if the CIA were to compete against the FBI and the Italian mob and the Irish mob, and it's like all of these underworld agencies, and each operated by like a different crime boss. You know, like Lawrence Fishburne, as I said, he governs over the hobos and those agents. And then you have this character, what is this, Ian McShane? He's an actor, and he's known as Winston, I think. And I hope it's Winston. And he governs the Continental. So anything to do with the Continental, that's his arena. And then, as I talked about before, Santino has a seat on the high table, so that he rules over a different group of people. And all these factions, they're not fighting I don't know, are they fighting each other? They may be fighting each other. But here's the thing that was really interesting toward the end. And I don't want to give this away. You go see the film. But John Wick found himself at the end being a target by all of these agencies. All of these people now are hunting him down. And it really reminded me of two things, okay? And the best stories are when the audience member can identify with the lead character. So what this reminded me of is, like, you ever have one of those days or those lives when you feel like the world is against you? And that's what John Wick is going through. He's in a situation where everybody's against him, and he tried to do the right thing and ends up making all of these enemies. And I love the line that he gave at the end. He tells Winston, he goes, no matter, he says, tell them, whoever comes, that I'll kill them all. And I love that, because that shows that he wasn't giving up. But he has a ton of agents coming after him. And it sets it up very nicely for Chapter 3. And it's not one of those things where you can see it's out just to get money to have all these different sequels. And, you know, you can see that it made a natural, the sequel will be a natural transition. It will pick up nicely from the second one. And this brings me to another element of how New York, or not even New York, let's set that aside, but how this film has a richness and character in terms of the settings, the production design. There is, when they put a hit out on characters, what they do is they call it accounts payable. And accounts payable is run by these women who are dressed like in the 40s and 50s. And they're using outdated typewriters and computers and phones. And I even saw one of them typing on a Commodore, I think it was a VIC 20 or 64. Now, that's going way back in the 80s when computers were just coming out to the general public. Don't know if you guys know what a Commodore 64 or VIC 20 is, but Google that sucker. And these women were dressed in the 40s and the 50s style, but yet had tattoos all over their bodies. And they were using old-fashioned typewriters and pens and phones, and I loved it. And it just, like, it was diametrically opposed to this modern-day New York, you know. And there's that duality again, you know, that opposition, you know. And the film made use of that, and it was just wonderful, you know. There's not a lot of character development or character arcs in this film, but it doesn't need to be, because, you know, this movie lets you know what it's about. It's like it's the writing is on the wall. Look, we're an action film. We're all about, you know, the martial arts fight scene, the gun scenes. We're not trying to be Academy Award nominated picture. You know, it's very honest and upfront about what it is. but it also takes this detour into real stylistic filmmaking. And I really loved it, especially the end in the Hall of Mirrors in the museum, you know, and I kind of walked away really just appreciating the value of that. And you know, like I said, independent filmmakers I find are too stuck in the traditional means of filmmaking, whether it's the linear style or if it's just like not really using metaphors, you know, or symbolism to tell the story, but just relying on these long character expositions. So and a lot of, like, you know, the movie in John Wick and the story was told through the looks of the characters, his emotions. Because we know, look, I think Keanu Reeves is awesome, but we know he's not the best actor in the world. But he does this so well, you know. He plays it really well, especially against Ruby Rose, and she kicks ass as this. And what I love about her character is when she fights John Wick, it's not like she's kicking his ass. She's holding her own, but you can tell it's a tough fight for her because she's a female. You know, too many times we see these directors making these movies about these women, and the women can just kick guys' asses, and you're looking at this woman who has to be what 70 pounds. You know, like, how is she going to be beating up this guy who's a weightlifter? It's not, you know. So, you know, Ruby Rose, she's very petite in the film, but you can see how she's skilled and gets away with doing certain techniques, you know. But she has a tough time with John. But the thing is, what's good about the character, she's relentless, you know. So, I mean, check it out for that. And go into the parts of where the fight scenes and the weaponry that he uses is all cool. It's really awesome how he uses all these guns and how he hides them in certain places to where he can find them and use them when he needs them. That's really well. So anyway, those are the things I think I wanted to touch upon with this film that I found so really intriguing about it, was that they're just this depth and breadth to this film that you have to watch and pick up on, because not too many films utilize these elements. You know, not only is it just stylistically nice, but it is done from a perspective of, listen, we're trying to communicate a message here through metaphors, through symbols. If you can pick up on it, great. If you can't, just enjoy the action sequences. You know, I mean, that's what the film is doing. And, you know, one of the things I tell filmmakers too is you don't have to use a linear storytelling device. If you look at Deadpool, which use the non-linear storytelling devices, or other films that have done that, you will see that doing something nonlinear can be very interesting, also very challenging if it's done correctly. So study Deadpool to get an idea of that, and study Chinatown, you know, Citizen Kane, 2001: A Space Odyssey. All these things make use of symbolism and imagery to tell a story, as opposed to dialogue. Because when I first started out as a scriptwriter, my pages were long because I had characters they would talk too much. They would tell you about themselves and tell you about what they were going to do. And that's the mark of a very inexperienced screenwriter or filmmaker, because visuals tell more than 1,000 words. And if you are a really good storyteller, you will make use of every device you can get your hand on. And the way you do that is to watch films, study them, break them down, understand why certain films are successful, why other films are failures, and then incorporate that, what you think works, into your film, but stay true to who you are and what you want to make. Another film I think is good, check out Memento. That really makes use of a nonlinear storytelling device. I think that film is awesome. But we're in an age now where everything is CGI. It's very quick. We're not really getting too much into developing characters or using any type of symbolism at all. It's kind of becoming a lost art, I guess, among very, very, avant-garde or divergent filmmakers who are in art houses and stuff of that nature. And I don't see a lot of this being used in the African-American community of filmmakers too. But anyway, so check out John Wick 2. Let me know if you feel the same way. If you hate it, I totally understand. If people hate it, I'm like, yeah, I can see why you hate it. It's very gory, a lot of blood, body count is very high. Don't take any kids to see it. But if you are someone who appreciates film aesthetics, I think you'll see beyond just the fight scenes and the violence, and you see something else there that it's very rich and meaningful, and it's very stylistic. So anyway, if you like this video and you want to see more, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and until next time, this is Ron K. Armstrong, filmmaker extraordinaire. That's all for now.